Welcome to Second Take, the show that focuses on the issues behind the news. I'm Mariaan, Webb. Joining me in our Johannesburg studio today is Engineering News editor Terence Creamer, who has been tracking developments at the hearings into Eskom's application for a 35% a year tariff increase. Terence, welcome to Second Take. This time, the energy regulator did things a little bit differently. It's taking the hearings to all 9 provinces. Why has it made such an undertaking, and has it been worthwhile?
Well, there was massive political pressure, I think, to spread the load right across the country. We had a shock last year in November, well actually first in September, when we heard that Eskom was applying for a 45% a year increase from April 1, 2010 until the end of March 2013. And there was an overwhelming response to this application, something like 300 written submissions. And now we see there's going to be something like 30 oral submissions to NERSA during this hearings process. So there was pressure on NERSA to take this far and wide and let people speak about it. And I think in some ways, yes, it's an expensive process, and in many venues there really hasn't been a lot of representation. But it has raised the consciousness of the issue, albeit at probably a difficult time of year. You know, it's January, people have just come out of the Christmas break. So I think it probably isn't an ideal timing, but I think it's done quite a lot to spread the message that we have this threat and we should discuss it.
What are some of the critical arguments against Eskom receiving this increase, and how is the utility responding to this?
Well, as you can imagine, there's not much sympathy for this application. People feel, you know, government and Eskom have messed up, and now you're turning to us, the consumer, to bail you out. And so all the old hairy chestnuts are brought up again, executive bonuses, Eskom's cost management, why the build program didn't get going earlier. And so we've had to rehash a lot of that, as well as, is the system properly structured? Is there space for the private sector? Why is Eskom the single buyer? But I think when we get down to the nub of the matter, it's really about a revenue requirement formula that NERSA has to apply fairly rigidly. So there were a couple of issues that were applied to that formula. One around the pricing policy, whether it's appropriate to have cost-reflective tariffs. That was a fairly new thing that COSATU raised. You know, they're not too sure that cost reflectivity is the best idea. That is our pricing policy, which guides these hearings. They're saying, you know, it will perpetuate a situation where industry, the big users that always are cheaper for Eskom to supply, will get lower tariffs. And they feel it should be the reverse, and that ordinary consumers should get lower tariffs. But the big, I think, new issue was people really engaged with the formula. Some people really engaged with the formula. And they looked at the revenue requirement and the way Eskom did its calculations. And Eskom used the revalued assets formula, which obviously gives them a much higher tariff and depreciation charges, etc., that come with that underpin that. And others said that maybe you should be applying a historic valuation on those assets to get your rate of return. There's also some debate, does Eskom really require such a big rate of return? I think a weighted average cost of capital of 10% plus. So those were some of the sort of a next level of engagement which we haven't really seen before. Maybe it has been in written submissions, but it came more into the public domain. Eskom had, you know, good, well thought out, albeit very unpopular arguments to rebuff that. And they did, I think, themselves a good service of putting their case forward and why they need it. And all the time also mentioning that if we don't get this, you know, we may have to come back and look at this tariff again, because we are at the moment the only game in town, and we therefore need this revenue in order to run our business, in order to build the new projects.
It seems battle lines have been drawn between Eskom and COSATU about the prospect of raising capital by selling assets, specifically selling a stake in Kusile. Can you reflect on that?
Yeah, COSATU is, as you can well imagine, anti any privatization in any form. This proposal by Eskom that they sell 30% of Kusile to private investors and potentially raising that to 49%, COSATU sees as tantamount to sort of the start of a privatisation process, the thin edge of the wedge. Similarly, with their argument to cost-reflective tariffs, they're saying it's just really creating the space for a private sector-dominated electricity supply sector, which is going to be profit-driven And that's going to mean that we don't benefit from lower costs. In fact, they say tariffs are going to rise the more private sector interests come into this field. So you can see that there's going to be something of a tussle over this. It's a policy tussle, it's an ideological one, and one that will probably have to be sorted out elsewhere. It's not an Eskom decision, it's really a shareholder decision, a government policy decision. But on the other hand, you know, you've got the private sector saying, gee whiz, we really need competition in this environment. Eskom's build program has escalated astronomically, and they are not cheap builders of power plants. In fact, many are arguing that at $3,000 a kilowatt, Medupi is amongst the most expensive power project in the world today. And private sector ingenuity balance sheets should be brought in to try and lower the cost of that build program. It would also be good for the consumer because they use their balance sheets, not our tariffs, to fund the development of these IPPs. And they're saying also, Kusile, you can't only offer 30%. No one's going to be interested. They want to have control. They need to be able to bring private sector management skills and expertise to bear to bring down the cost of the capital build at Kusile, which is very high, 142 billion rand, which is close to something like $4,000 a kilowatt delivered, and also on the operational side. So they're saying, you know, it's not enough. So you've got on the one hand saying don't do it, Kasatu, on the other hand saying it's really not enough.
Terence, just finally, what do you think will NERSA's decision be in February?
Well, they've got a lot of food for thought. As I said, a lot of the discussions were probably not relevant to the revenue requirement formula, so they can discard a whole lot of that. In fact, I think that should be used to inform the integrated resource plan, and possibly DOE should take a look at those oral and written submissions and even have public hearings of their own on the integrated resource plan, which really guides the vision for the next 20 years. But they're going to come back, distill all this information, and I think Eskom knows they're not going to get what they're asking for. I think the key for me is what formula do they apply for the rate of return on assets? Is it going to be the historic valuation, or is it going to be the sort of modern equivalent basis for determining that? And I think they're going to have to mull over that. And I think if they decide that those who are calling for historic asset valuations, I think it's going to be closer to the 25%. If they decide that Eskom is correct in the way they've applied it, it's going to be closer to the 35%. But I say somewhere between 25 and 30% is what we could probably expect on 24th of February.
Thank you very much. That is the Second Take show for this week. Thank you for watching, and join us again next week for more news analysis.